Hello, this is Rudy Davis. It's Tuesday, July the 7th, the year 2020. Today I found a intriguing book in an old used store that's kind of out of the way. They had it up on a shelf and I started to look at the first few pages and I got very intrigued. I noticed there's 192 pages total in the book, so if I read about 20 pages each part, I can get the whole thing read into YouTube in about 10 videos. So this will be the first of 10 parts. It was an old store. I want to give you a little bit of a backstory on what I've learned so far. It was an old book. It's still got the paper cover on it. It says, "Defend the Home Base. They Got Their Man" by Elmer Lynn Williams. I tried to find this book on Amazon, and it appears that there are a couple for sale. Like I said, it's kind of a pricey book. I expect it's out of print. It's very rare. I looked up Elmer Lynn Williams on, popular search engines, and you won't find anything about him. You won't find anything about Elmer Lynn Williams on YouTube. I couldn't find a Wikipedia page on him or anything. So inside the front cover of the book, it says, "To my beloved and talented friend, Warner E." And it could be Galman. I can't read the writing, man. It says Warner E. We'll go with Salmon, but I don't know for sure. From Elmer Lynn Williams, September the 20th of 1942. So the book is a very old book. It's signed by the author. And I'm going to read everything on the cover, the back cover. I'm going to read everything on the inside. And then we're going to read the first 20 pages. And like I said, because I'm familiar with Gordon Call, I'm familiar with Eddie Ray Kane, I'm familiar with Ed Brown, this book is intriguing to me because it sounds so, in the first few pages that I have read, it sounds a lot like them. So let's start reading, and I'm just going to, like I said, read the cover. And then I'll go into page 1 and I'll let you know. Defend the Home Base. They Got Their Man by Elmer Lynn Williams. A story of income tax persecution. The back cover. Result of 2 years' research. To assemble the facts for this book, 2 years were spent in the study of court records, newspapers, official reports, some of them more than 20 years old. The trail led to distant states and to the nation's capital. The statements printed have been subjected to the most rigid test. Many of them are explosive but true. The political battle in the background cost one man the presidency of the United States. The public service of another broke up a racket of $60 million a year. A political vendetta ruined his health and deprived him of his liberty. Approved by experts, the manuscript has been read and heartily approved by attorneys of national reputation. Able newspaper men have pronounced it an excellent piece of work. All right. It has an address of a publisher, but I'll just skip that. The author, Dr. Elmer Lynn Williams, has edited and published Latin, a magazine devoted to civic and social justice in Chicagoland for the past 15 years. He has long been known as the fighting parson of Chicago. His exposures of political corruption have resulted in many reprisals. His home has been bombed twice. Recently, the state's attorney of Cook County indicted him for alleged criminal libel of his chief investigator. Time magazine of June 16, 1941, reported the trial thus. Chicago's busiest muckraker is the Reverend Elmer Williams, Methodist, husky, hot-tempered, publisher of Latin, a lively, often accurate little sheet which for years has lambasted the Chicago Tribune, gangsters, labor racketeers, politicians, but not until last week was Crusader Williams sued for libel. A state attorney's investigator and 2 furriers sued because Latin called them fur racketeers. Acquitted in 20 minutes flat, Gadfly Williams told the court, "I am not a reformer, I am an informer." Dr. William has lectured for many years in all parts of America on civic questions. He is the author of several books, a contributor to the press, and has discussed many problems on the air. His home is, and then it gives his home address, and I'll probably skip that, but if you guys want to know, let me know. All right, let's go. One of the first pages, it says William H. Malone, has a picture of William H. Malone, and says, Mr. Malone is a life member of the Chicago Historical Society and the Art Institute. He is a member of the Lakeshore Athletic Club, the Loyal Order of Moose, the Masonic Fraternity, Knights Templars, and Shrine. Former mayor of Park Ridge, former member of the State Board of Equalization, former chairman of the Illinois Tax Commission, and Republican candidate for governor in the 1932 primary. They Got Their Man, A Story of Income Tax Persecution by Elmer Lynn Williams, ABAMDD, Chicago, 1941. To the President and the Congress of the United States, Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, this memorial is presented to you for your consideration. The data assembled constitutes a general grievance prevailing throughout our nation. It arises from the manner in which income tax laws are perverted by the federal system of prosecution. The facts are submitted in the belief that the President and the Congress are unaware of the deplorable Gestapo methods employed in the administration of this law, threatening thereby the priceless heritage we like to call our unfettered way of life. He's calling the way in which the tax system is implemented Gestapo methods. And earlier I read his house had been bombed twice. This was going on in 1941. We hope that as a result of your investigation, federal cases in the future will conform to the accepted interpretation of the word prosecution, and that persecution will have no place in the American jurisprudence. If so, the victim of the maladministration recited here may find some solace in the knowledge that society will have gained a great deal because of his most grievous loss. Elmer Lynn Williams, ABAMDD. Normally, I don't read table of contents, but let's do it. Table of Contents, Memorial to the President and Congress, page 7. Introduction, 11. Preface, The Case of William H. Malone, 15. The Motive, M-O-T-I-F, 17. Chapter 1, The Homecoming, 25. Looking Back, 27. The Pullman Company, 29. The Pullman Company was Chapter 3. Chapter 4, The South Dakota Campaign, 35. Chapter 5, The Reassessment, page 45. Chapter 6, The Broken Pledge, page 63. Chapter 7, Grand Jury Abuses, page 67. Chapter 8, The Indictment, 72. Chapter 9, The Trial, 78. Chapter 10, The Accusers Accused, 85. Chapter 11, The Proctor Purse, 105. Chapter 12, I Goes Foul Blows, 111. Chapter 13, I Go a Public Utility Pet, 121. Chapter 14, The Appeal, 127. Chapter 15, Margaret Haley. You know what? I'm not going to read the page numbers. I'll just read you the chapters. Margaret Haley. Chapter 16, The Probation Puzzle. Chapter 17, In Durant's Vow. Chapter 18, Another Homecoming. Chapter 19, An American Dreyfus. Chapter 20, Recapitulation. Then we have an appendix, Birds of a Feather, I Go Pays Reverence, Edward Joseph Kelly, the Dowdle Brothers, D-O-W-D-L-E Brothers, George L. Chamberlain, Convicts Given Probation by Judge Hawley, Federal Justice. You got illustrations of William H. Malone, Miss William H. Malone, Governor John P. Altgeld, Governor Frank O. Loden, Attorney Olaf E. Ray, Governor Edward F. Doon, Attorney Henry L. Blim, Cartoon, Justice and Perjury, Judge William H. Hawley, John W. Ellis, Judge Dennis E. Sullivan. Wow, I know a Judge Sullivan. Frank L. Tuttle, Thomas D. Huff, Judge Craig Hood, Colonel William Cooper Proctor, Judge Michael L. Igo, a silver bowl, a gift to Mr. and Miss Malone, Judge J. Earl Major, General Leonard Wood, Igo's Board of Strategy, Margaret A. Haley. All right, let's pick up on page 11. Introduction. The administration of the federal income tax law has been characterized by gross favoritism, partisan bias, and factional vengeance. So ambiguous and confusing are its provisions that the federal officials repeatedly disagree in their interpretation of it. The fact is attested by a statement of the U.S. Treasury Department that in 1 year, the department had made more than 159,000 mistakes in computing taxes. In fact, during the year 1940, over 65 million was refunded to those who contested the demands of government agents. In reading of these tax refunds amounting into the millions, one naturally asks, does the great difference in the sums really due in contrast to the amounts which were arbitrarily demanded indicate the use of bureaucratic tyranny, just plain inefficiency, or both? This bold truth definitely stands out, i.e., the victims were forced to pay the unreasonable demands and then compelled to employ counsel and fight to force the government to pay back the money it had illegally taken from them. These persons can at least be thankful that they had the means and forethought to pay rather than to be indicted and tried on the charge of criminal evasion. For in criminal procedure in income tax trials today, conviction is almost certain regardless of the guilt or innocence of a defendant. In the enforcement of this law, there is a very close resemblance to the dictatorial functioning in Europe, where Stalin and Mussolini used the firing squads and Hitler the guillotine to put the fear of death into the hearts of their enslaved subjects, thus compelling obedience to every edict. Once our government agents resort to criminal indictments, unfair trials, and prison sentences to accomplish the same results as these foreign dictators achieve by their gruesome methods. We borrow the thesis of a blind senator. None are so blind as those who will not see, yet none as so keen as those with vision failed. A paradox of nature this seems to be, the soul and mind refusing to be veiled. The late Senator Shaw of Minnesota, though blind, saw clearly the growing abuse and misuse of power in the hands of agents and the income tax departments. Senator Shaw raised his voice in protest in 1927. Since then, we have seen the income tax laws and regulations used to punish political opponents without fair hearing. Citizens have been ruined and deprived of their liberty who had no intention of defrauding the government. On the other hand, we have seen political allies whose intent to defraud was beyond question, permitted to settle quietly and to continue in opposition in positions of public trust. In further proof of their acceptability, millions of dollars raised through taxation have been entrusted for public spending to these plunderers of the people. In the chapters which follow, so many examples are cited of the ruthless abuse of power that Senator Shaw's pronouncement seems almost like an inspired prophecy. The blind senator speaks. The one glaring governmental agency that constitutes a menace to the citizens is the Income Tax Bureau, which often goes outside the constitutional limitations and frequently harasses the citizens by unjust exactions and by the oppressive conduct of its agents. This system has one defect that is fundamental. That is its lack of certainty, involving not only the time and manner of payment, but the clear, definite, and fixed amount. While the Bureau is a babel of conflicting regulations and opinions, it believes it is so entrenched by authority granted and assumed, and by its anonymous character, that it even dares to attack the citizens by a charge of fraud without substantial pretext or cause. Such a regime of bureaucracy is deadly. The Bureau's increasing arbitrary authority is becoming more sinister and obtrusive, and the system is increasing in complexity and confusion. The procedure of enforcement goes much deeper than that of tax collecting system. The Bureau is inquisitorial. It is bureaucracy. Washington is cluttered with its offices. Its forces swarm over the country, and the cardinal doctrine under which it operates is to inspire the citizen with fear. Agent spies and snoopers annoy and plague the citizens. The agents and inspectors, rarely of a high order in point of skill or character, must show some kind of results. The Bureau grades them for promotion of increased salary, or still better, for the honor roll, not on what taxes are finally returned to the government, but by the amounts they mark up first or charge against the taxpayer. That practice permits and promotes, if it does not direct, a species of blackmail against the American citizen. Once having started in pursuit, the agent assumes authority to impute fraud to the most innocent transactions, and the perfectly honest taxpayer must submit to indignities, odium, accusations of fraud and criminality, and be put to heavy expense to prove to his own government that he is not a criminal. The various departments back up the agents on the principle that any doubt must be resolved against the taxpayers. A citizen is advised not to show his indignation before those whom his hearing is had, as they can make it go hard with him. Advice is unhesitatingly given to crook the knee before whom one goes for a hearing, and these hearings are a little better than star chamber affairs. I'm going to have to look up what a star chamber is. I think I've heard that before. Blackjack rulings. In an article under date of May 23, 1938 in the Chicago Daily News, Westbrook Pegler had this to say with reference to the enforcement of our income tax law by the federal government. Nobody on earth can make out an honest income tax return, taking full advantage of his rights under the law, and not lay himself open to malicious political charges or fraud. The experts of the Internal Revenue Bureau admit this off the record. The law and the rulings are full of dishonest tricks and traps, and the Bureau itself can and does employ trick constructions and blackjack rulings to extort money which isn't due. What is a blackjack ruling? I need to look up star chamber, and let's do that right now. Hold on just a second. I got a phone here. Let's look it up. I hate reading stuff and not knowing what the heck I'm reading. Okay, star chamber meaning. A star chamber was an English court which sat at the Royal Palace of Westminster from the late 15th century to the mid-17th century, and was composed of privy councillors and common law judges to supplement the judicial activities of the common law and equity courts in civil criminal matters. All right. Blackjack ruling. What is a blackjack ruling? Blackjack ruling. Okay. No, they're giving me like blackjack when you play like 21. Maybe this book, since it's written in 1940, is using a little bit of English that you can't understand. All right. Well, anyway, it's talking about blackjack and playing 21 in Las Vegas, so I don't know. If you guys know what he's talking about, a blackjack ruling, I'd like to know. Anyway, let's continue. Where was I? Okay, Bureau itself can and does employ trick construction and blackjack rulings to extort money which is not due. Colonel Frank Knox' outspoken denunciation. We quote Colonel Frank Knox from his speech delivered at Quincy, Illinois. Colonel Knox, publisher of the Chicago Daily News, is now Secretary of the U.S. Navy. When private citizens have honestly and earnestly protested, what has happened to those citizens? They have been assailed as undesirables and vindictively pursued as crooks. If a citizen is hauled before an investigating committee, every effort is made to smear him and to assassinate his character. If a citizen cannot be reached in other ways, the bloodhounds of the Internal Revenue Department are put on his income tax trail. His private papers are pawed over, and every effort is made to prove him a cheat, flim-flam in his government. There is a littleness of character, a meanness of soul about these petty tyrants. Investigation is their weapon, and vengeance is their purpose. Preface: The case of William H. Malone. From the foregoing general statements, let us proceed to the case of William H. Malone, former chairman of the Illinois State Tax Commission and candidate for the Republican nomination of governor of Illinois in 1932. Malone became a political target in one of the most sordid chapters in the history of income tax prosecution. The records which I examined after the trial prove it. I felt that something was wrong. The trial was too savage, the evidence was too meager, and the court was too eager to have done with the dirty business. Here was a paradox wherein the defendant was charged with willful evasion in making out his income tax returns for the years 1929 and 1930. He had protested certain taxes, but promised to pay any sum found in the U.S. Board of Tax Appeals to be due. He had kept but one set of books, which the government admitted were honestly kept. The agents of the government spent several years investigating everything pertaining to his affairs, all of which were open to them. They admitted that Malone extended them every assistance and that everyone employed by him had done likewise. Nevertheless, the indictment charged willful evasion, and it was for an alleged willful evasion that he was tried. As to why he was convicted, the reader may be the judge. The testimony at the trial shows that solemn promises by the government officials were broken. Witnesses were coerced and threatened. Bribes were tendered to secure an indictment. Man, have you guys heard stuff like that before? We don't do that anymore, do we? All right, page 16. The only witnesses the government could muster after 6 years of effort were 3 corporation lawyers who testified they had made campaign contributions to Malone, who has consistently denied that they ever contributed a dollar to him. Man, this sounds like Congressman Steve Stockman dealing with campaign finance contributions. And who's that guy that's an Indian? And he also dealt with it, and he was put in jail. Do you know his name, babe? The Indian dude who made a movie about Dinesh D'Souza. Thanks. Yeah, Dinesh D'Souza. These lawyers represented the Pullman Company and the Chicago Traction Lines. They had, on several occasions, appeared before the State Tax Commission while Malone was chairman and protested the capital stock tax, which Malone had confirmed against the corporations they represented, and the records prove Malone refused to allow a reduction. Hence, there was no reason to warrant their alleged political contributions, which, if they had made, would not be taxable since political gifts are not taxable as income. To overcome the government's lack of evidence, the prosecutor conducted the trial with the fury of a political feud. He resorted to personal abuse and falsehood to confuse a jury of men unfamiliar with the intricacies of income tax laws. There was a verdict of guilty and a sentence of 2 years in a penitentiary, a $5,000 fine. From this decision, an appeal was taken to the upper court. The case was ably presented to the United States Circuit Court of Appeals, but the judge who wrote the opinion denying relief to the defendant listened in listless silence and scornfully denied the plea for reversal. This same judge then hastened to a house party at the home of one of the Chicago mayors, at one of the Chicago's major tax dodgers, where a board of strategy assembled to promote the candidacy for the United States Senate of the district attorney who prosecuted Malone. Not long after, this same judge presided at the political mass meeting in Springfield where the district attorney began his unsuccessful campaign for a seat in the U.S. Senate. Denied relief in the U.S. Court of Appeals, Malone's friends prevailed upon him to seek probation from Judge Hawley. Every man who served as a juror later signed a petition in which they urged the trial judge not to punish Malone. They frankly admitted being unqualified to pass judgment on the intricate questions involved. The jury also urged that Malone be given a hearing in a civil suit before the Board of Tax Appeals. Thousands, including hundreds of prominent citizens, joined in the plea. The judge brushed aside the petitions with a righteous gesture, although he had before and since granted probation to automobile thieves, counterfeiters, white slavers, bootleggers, dope peddlers, and their ilk, many of whose names and crimes are listed in this volume. Bewildered, angry men and women, many of whom had attended every session of the trial, stood stunned by the action of the judge. Heated expressions of resentment gave vent to their indignation. There was an open declaration that right here in the USA, they had just witnessed another Dreyfus case. Solemn pledges were made to organize a committee to ferret out the truth, which would vindicate Malone as surely as the name of Captain Dreyfus was cleared by the determined efforts of his friends. A brief summary of the Dreyfus case is presented as the motif of this story. Motif. Émile Zola was presented in mid-December in 1897 when an official commission in Paris, France, opened the tomb of Voltaire in the Pantheon to disprove a rumor that the bones of Voltaire were not there. The eyes of Zola turned from the skeleton of the 18th century hero to the single inscription on the funeral stone. He defended Calas, C-A-L-A-S, etc. Page 18. Was Voltaire, the author of 2 score volumes, content to be remembered only for his defense of Jean Calas? Calas, a Huguenot, was accused of having murdered his oldest son for apostasy. Jean Calas was broken on the wheel, a process which lasted 2 hours, while he discoursed bravely with the chaplain and denied his guilt. When the question of executing the entire family of Calas arose, it was too much. All Europe remembered the protesting cry that went up from Voltaire. The family of Calas was saved. Voltaire's defense of Jean Calas remains one of the great documents of civilization. Ponder this. Oh, to live indignant, to live enraged, at false honor, at universal mediocrity, to be unable to read a newspaper without paling in anger, to feel the continual and irresistible need of crying aloud what one thinks, above all when one is alone in thinking it, and to be ready to abandon all the sweets of life for it. Less than a month from the time Émile Zola stood at the tomb of Voltaire and read the simple inscription quoted above, Zola released a thunderbolt which shook all France. Captain Alfred Dreyfus, an officer in the French army, had been sentenced to a living death on Devil's Island for treason. Émile Zola became convinced that Dreyfus was innocent, and despite the general belief that the condemned man was guilty, Zola risked his fame and fortune and his own liberty as he flung himself into the battle to clear the name of Alfred Dreyfus and secure his release. On January the 13th, 1898, there poured from the press of the French newspaper Aurore, A-U-R-R-O-R-E, 300,000 copies of Zola's famous document, I Accuse. Here is a paragraph from Zola's devastating accusation. Dreyfus cannot be vindicated unless the whole general staff is indicted. The War Office, through every possible expedient, through campaigns in the press, through pressure, and through influence, has sought to screen Esterhazy, the French officer who has shown later to be guilty and one who had tried to fasten his own guilt on Dreyfus. Where is there the truly powerful ministry, imbued with a just and wise patriotism, that would dare reform everything and restore everything? And how many citizens are there who, fearing an imminent war, tremble with alarm, knowing to whom supreme command of the national defense is entrusted? What a nest of low intrigue, corruption, and dissipation that sacred precinct has become, where the fate of the nation is to be decided. Ah, the abominable measures have been resorted to be in this affair of folly and stupidity, smacking of low police practice and unbridled nightmares of Spanish Inquisition, all for the sweet pleasure of a few uninformed and accounted personages who grind their heel into the nation, who hurl back into its throat the cry for truth and justice under the lying guise of reasons of state. And it is still a greater crime to have used the yellow press, to have permitted all the rascals of Paris to come to their to come to their aid, so that now we have the rascals triumphing insolently in the defeat of right and honesty. And it is a further crime for them to accuse those who desire France, generous, liberal, at the head of free and just nations, of plotting her downfall. It is a crime to misdirect public opinion and to pervert it until it becomes delirious. It is a crime to poison small and simple minds. It is a crime to exploit patriotism for motives of hatred. It is a crime, finally, to make the sword the modern god when all human science is at work to bring about a future of truth and justice. How pitiful that this truth, this justice, this truth, this justice, page 20, we passionately desired, seems more mutilated, punished, cast off than ever before. I just got to interject a personal note here. This thing is talking about how truth and justice have been perverted and how they've had dishonest trials. And, it's just, this stuff's been going on forever, man. I mean, it's just, the men's hearts are wicked, right? Read Pilgrim's Progress. It talks about the same stuff. Anyway, I'm going to continue. I know what desolation there is in the heart of M. Schur Kessner, and I firmly believe that he will deeply regret someday not having acted in a more direct and revolutionary manner during his interpellation in the Senate, for not having opened up the whole business, flung down the gauntlet irrevocably. He thought that the truth itself would suffice, and what was the use in overturning everything? And it is for the serene faith that he is now being so cruelly tormented, and likewise for Colonel Picquart, who through a sentiment of discipline and honor has been unwilling to publish the letters of General Gantz, while his superiors cover him with slime and direct a trial of him in the most incredible and outrageous manner. Kessner unearthed the proof of the innocence of Dreyfus. These are two of the victims, two brave, open-hearted men who waited for God to act while the devil was frightfully busy. Like Voltaire in the case of Collis, Zola opposed all France in defense of Alfred Dreyfus. It is interesting to note that in addition to the alleged evidence presented by the army, the distinguished expert Bertillon declared that the treasonable documents were written by Dreyfus himself, concealing his handwriting. And now Zola and Perux, manager of the newspaper Aurore, are cited for trial. They're putting the person who published the articles on trial. That's like putting Jeffrey Winehouse in prison because he published the bulletin. Zola for having written, and Perux for having published the article in defense of Dreyfus. February 7th, 1899, the trial of Zola began. The jury is composed of small tradespeople. The complacent judge suppresses the real issue, rules out testimony favorable to Zola with the declaration. The question will not be put. At last, Zola speaks in his own defense. I quote only his closing sentences. Did you read that? Did you hear what I just said? I just finished page 20, so we got to stop there. But it said the complacent judge suppresses the real issue, rules out testimony favorable to Zola with the declaration the question will not be put, which means that they're withholding exculpatory evidence. I mean, this book, it's amazing to me, too, that this book is nowhere to be found. I mean, isn't it amazing? Like a book like this, I had to find in like a thrift store that was in the back, and nobody even knew it existed. And I had to ask the lady for, it was a lot of money too. I mean, this was not a cheap book. She wanted $25 for it, but I got her to sell it to me for $18 because she was selling everything at a discount that day. But anyway, this is just amazing to me. I find this book incredibly amazing that it was written in 1941, and all the stuff that it's writing about, withholding exculpatory evidence and corrupt trials, putting the publisher in jail. I didn't know that about Voltaire, that he defended a guy that everybody thought was guilty. Anyway, named Calas, right? Calas. And then you have the Dreyfus affair, which I guess he got put in prison and he was innocent. And the people that try to stand up for the guy in prison, they also get put in prison. They withhold exculpatory evidence. And then it talks about how wicked the tax department is. And it talks about this guy's getting bombed twice. His own home got bombed twice. Listen, do you know why I feel like I'm not heard? I mean, I say a lot of stuff, right? But I feel like I'm never heard. You know why? Because I believe that in order to be heard, you have to be believed. And nobody ever believes anything I say, but it's true. I don't think I'm lying. I mean, my wife believes me. You know what my wife told one of her friends recently? And she didn't say it to be arrogant. She was just trying to be factual. She said, tell me, and her friend is very, very liberal, right? She said to her friend, tell me in the past 12 years where I've been wrong. Because she was referring to things like Obama's birth certificate or... I've asked twice and never got a reply. And she's never getting a reply. My wife never gets a reply. She's talking about things like Obama's birth certificate or Sandy Hook or Ruby Ridge or Waco or 9/11, stuff like that, Anyway, I've stopped on page 20. We got 9 more parts to do, and I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the book. The title of the book is They Got Their Man by Elmer Lynn Williams. We'll pick up on page 21 when we start part 2.